Recently I've realized that we mostly see everything that happens in One Piece from the perspective of Luffy and the Straw Hats, which kind of made me wonder what was Whitebeard's perspective on everything that happened. He's the man who arguably influenced the One Piece world even more than Roger did, and also had the better beard, let's be honest about that. So really, what did he know? When did he know it, and what did he do about it? Today I'm gonna answer exactly that because I've been reading One Piece with Whitebeard's perspective in mind, and it has been quite eye-opening to say the least. And let me tell you, I was really surprised how much of his personality clearly was determined by his early childhood. In case you don't know, Whitebeard struggled to make ends meet after his home, Sphinx Island in the New World, was rejected by the world government because they could not afford the heavenly tribute, which is a tax every government-affiliated island has to pay to the Celestial Dragons. Now, as an orphan, he was then left with one choice only. He had to become a pirate so he could actually look after his village. Luckily for him though, his massive build and power made the job pretty easy, I would assume. And actually, I can absolutely see a world where he ended up at the beginning of his life hopping from crew to crew, probably because his smaller crew initially lost in battle. Why do I say this? Well, we do know that he was a pirate before he ever met Rocks, and well, we don't know if he had just one previous crew or even multiples. Regardless, we do know that his life was insanely unstable. Let's just say this is the type of upbringing that teaches someone core values, and in Whitebeard's case, it was to never let people live the life that he had to. But as is the case in the One Piece world, he could really only do that with true power. Unrivaled strength is what would bring security and wealth to those around him, and so there was one man that he just needed to follow. I'm of course talking about the dreaded and infamous Gol D. He had the power, he had the connections, and he had purpose. Rocks wanted to conquer the entire world, and his crew was full of the strongest people he could find. Names like Charlotte Linlin, Shiki, and the infamous John, whoever that was again. Now, these people were quite literally making waves, but so was Edward Newgate, and so Rocks brought him on board his crew as well. And here, Whitebeard would finally learn the true importance of family, commitment, and of course also fame. You see, the Rocks crew wasn't really super lovey-dovey or supportive like we know, for example, from the Straw Hats, because these crewmates of his weren't actually family. Heck, they were hardly friends to him, except for one, but I'll talk about her in just a moment. But nonetheless though, of course, Newgate did know the importance of connections. They are great for big wins, but he realized that being the strongest puts a really big target on your head from other pirates, but also the Marines. And so he actually made sure that the relationships he did forge would be strong enough to protect his family in the future while keeping them far enough away to keep his own family safe. And so looking back at Whitebeard's early upbringing, this all kind of really put his life into real perspective for me. Whitebeard's greatest character trait, I think, objectively, is that he's a big, loving daddy. But it's something that builds up over time here. Starting alone, joining a great crew, and then finding that camaraderie wherever he goes. It's kind of funny because Mihawk says that Luffy's greatest trait is the fact that he inspires everyone around him, and I kind of wonder if he learned that from seeing Whitebeard conquer the seas first. But going back to his time with Rocks, Rocks of course wanted to rule the world, and Newgate was the soldier that would make that happen. His life was full of fighting and looting, which I can only imagine was a real emotional mess for Whitebeard. Because under that cold exterior, we of course all by this point know that he had a heart of real gold, and this way of life was probably somewhat eating away at him. Really looking at it from today's perspective, I assume he really only managed to push through here because of his desire to provide for Sphinx Island, which is again his home. But nonetheless, if you're a good guy, that sort of stuff that he was doing probably still really weighs on you as a person, especially when you are acting all alone. So I think that Whitebeard needed to find someone to care about and be vulnerable with, even if it just meant that he could have a bit of a break from all the chaos around him, which is where Stussy comes in. Oh yeah, it's time for some romance. You see, we do know from chapters 1072 and 1096 that Eddie and Stussy here had something going on, let's put it that way. She rode around on his shoulder, maybe a little bit more, and apparently that's how babies are made. I just found that out today. Because eventually it seems that Weevil could in fact have been a happy little accident that happened on the Rocks crew, or with her genius intellect, maybe Stussy just attempted to clone Whitebeard after the Rocks crew eventually split up. Now, a few years later, as the crew prepared themselves for the big attack on God Valley, we also know that Whitebeard recruited the young Oni Kaido. And I guess technically that would mean that Kaido is the first person Whitebeard recruited to be a part of his family. Now, while it wasn't exactly the same as his own crew, he still took this young man on and helped train him up into the absolute monster that we know and love today. Or used to, I guess. In my eyes, this is the perfect test run for fatherhood. He's not Kaido's stepdad, he's the dad who stepped up, I guess. And speaking of stepping up, he also seemed to take on the role of vice captain for this crew at some point as well. Now, of course, I don't know this for sure because this has never been officially confirmed so far by Oda so far, but based on what he says during chapter 1096 about Rocks and where he's positioned in the panel, in front of literally everyone, I would assume that he is the person who was in charge of rallying all the troops. Not sure if you'd agree with that. Okay, but with that in mind, I think we can now officially transition from his early days to the legendary God Valley incident. A moment that would of course go on to shape his entire life, as we'll see when we talk about his own crew and of course the big highlight, the war at Marineford. Now, at God Valley itself, we do know a couple of things took place for certain. Whitebeard and the Rocks crew faced off against the Raja pirates for the final time together as a crew, and he also came face to face with the greatest pair of fighters in the world government, Sigil and Garling, and Luffy's granddad, Monkey D. Garp. Now, based on the fact that Garp ended up teaming up with Roger to defeat Zebek, and the fact that Whitebeard aches when he looks at Shanks' face in this panel right here, I think it's pretty safe to assume that during this battle, Whitebeard actually ended up facing off against the Holy Knights and Garling in particular. And so what actually happened in this very likely, but again not confirmed, standoff with Garling, and how would that have changed his life? Well, I personally would kind of assume that it went something like this. Garling, who is somehow related to Shanks, is a real egoistic man who puts himself above everyone else, including his own allies. This guy got everything that he wanted, or he just took it by force. Wealth, fame, and power, this dude had it all, and this just doesn't click well with Whitebeard at all. I mean, he's in a way the exact opposite type of character of Garling, I think, a proud man who would give the shirt off his back to a child in need. And their battle might have proven to him how broken the world can truly be, and that Whitebeard may not be able to fix it himself. A man like Garling could be that powerful, skilled, and ruthless without any humanity at all, and to Whitebeard, it's a disgusting reality check. I would argue that he'd spent his entire remaining life in pursuit of power through connection and care, and this monster had none of it and still was stronger. Garling was rotten, he was broken, and he was completely morally empty. But nonetheless, I think that Newgate gained something really important from it, because this moment truly reinforced his own ideals. He did know that power could be achieved through love and sacrifice, and he was going to do everything he could to make exactly that happen, walk the right path. In the end, this battle left him with many scars, the most important of which was across his heart, because even Garling, with his wicked and vile blade, couldn't cut through the love and care he held inside of him. That and all the Conqueror's hockey, I guess. Now, his body was broken, but inside he stayed absolutely strong. So now, all he really had to do was make his body as strong as his spirits, because that way, truly nobody would be ever able to take him down. However, as we all know, this would also end up serving to be his one Achilles heel. Before I can get into why that is though, we first have to move on to the aftermath of God Valley. I mean, what did Whitebeard do after Rocks was actually disbanded? Who did he cross paths with? And how did that harden his own resolve? Well, after the Rocks crew lost pretty damn hard at God Valley, at least as far as we know, his temporary family finally split. And so as a result, he finally decided to build his own, meaning that Eddie over here started recruiting strong, wayward souls like himself, and I can only imagine that with every single island he'd go to, someone strong and also lost would appear in front of him. After all, remember, he ended up with a fleet of 16 ships and over 1 1,600 crew members. Yeah, you heard that right. Talk about a big family type of guy. Now, whether it was a really strange and gloomy kid like Blackbeard or a knucklehead samurai like Odin, those who lacked guidance in life found their way to the warm and brutal embrace of Whitebeard. And eventually, of course, he started growing bigger and bigger in terms of power and fame. He was no longer just Edward Newgate of the Rocks pirate, he was now the legendary pirate Whitebeard, whose family ruled the seas. Well, almost at least. Because as you know, there was one stubborn man somehow above him, the man who defeated his own captain, Gol D. Roger. Now we do know that both of them clashed many times throughout their lifetime, but it wasn't until their fateful 3-day battle that the score was truly settled. Both of these crews were insanely closely matched, but every member of Roger's crew had the edge in the end. Dark King Rayleigh defeated his right-hand Marco with ease, and my man Scoppa Gaban here probably defeated like 1 million pirates or something. I'm just gonna throw that out there. And Roger's crew just, in the end, just had this slight edge up. But it didn't sting like his previous defeats, if you can even call it a defeat, let's be real, it was so close. Instead, it was oddly inspiring, as Roger also was a kind and fun man. He goofed around, he yearned for a good fight, and he treated his crew like family, which is something that earned him some major points of respect in Whitebeard's eyes as well. Well, that is until he stole his buddy Odin. I mean, what a tool, bro. But it was for a pretty good reason in the end, and it is also what Odin wanted. And so while the choice was pretty hard, he did let his brother from Wano set sail alongside his lifelong rival, knowing that he'd grow with his new family as well. After this event, years would pass, and eventually Roger did become the king of pirates, and during this time, Whitebeard was just doing pretty much more of the same thing. At least that was until Roger came to ask him out for a drink. A moment that surprisingly would go on to change the entire One Piece world forever. Okay, let me just start by saying that I truly believe that Whitebeard really just wanted to know that Odin and Roger's journey was fulfilling, but after all his wandering around the Grand Line, meeting Roger, meeting the likes of Garp, or even his captain Zebek, he did know that something was up with the One Piece world. I think he realized that he wasn't actually the top of the hierarchy, and destiny itself was the reason for that, because he never really cared about Laugh Tale, but there was something about that D initial in their names that stuck out like a sore thumb to him. He definitely already knew something at this point, but he did ask Roger what he knew, partially out of curiosity, but also because one of his sons had that same letter. Blackbeard. He felt like Teach was already destined for big things, and Whitebeard really needed to know why. Now, of course, Roger, on his end, also trusting Whitebeard, happily shared everything that he could since, well, he was on his last legs anyway at this point with his illness. And based on what Whitebeard does in the series after this point, it really seems like pretty much proven at this point to me, like he learned of Joy Boy, the Void Century, and even the gods up on Marijua / Imu and the Gorosei. But what I'm pretty sure that he didn't expect to hear is that Roger had a plan to create the next Joy Boy and change the world. That's right, I think that at this fateful meeting, he also learned about Ace. Now, this is honestly where I do have to shift a little bit into theory territory, because I believe the next part isn't at all guaranteed, but in my books, it's pretty likely, and we'll find out later if I'm correct. I would say that odds are that Whitebeard knew Roger's son would be raised up by Garp, a fellow member of the D clan, and that Shanks was going to take care of him after that. I mean, that was the initial plan at least. So I think you can imagine just how shocked he was when that young man years later actually challenged him as a warlord. Alongside his own ragtag crew, Fire Fist Ace tried to take down his father's rival. And his passion, his drive, and his power were brighter than the sun, and that's when it kind of clicked for Whitebeard. Roger may have actually done it, and this kid was destined for greatness and to save the world. He's the one who could truly become king of the pirates because he had the will of D and those fire powers as well. And that's why Whitebeard hedged his bets on Ace. He did everything he could to build him up to become a legendary pirate, but ironically, it was also his own love and care that would end up ruining it all as as well. You see, Whitebeard's biggest weakness and his biggest strength was that his children always were something he cared the most about, and unfortunately that made him vulnerable as well. While he did set his sights on Ace and the world, the black sheep of his family started bearing its wicked fangs as well. And he was none the wiser until Shanks brought this to his attention, but at that point it was already too late. Blackbeard now was roaming the seas all on his own, having murdered another child of his, Thatch. But why? There had to be a reason, and so Whitebeard decided that he'd figure that out, but that didn't work for Ace at all. No, he didn't raise someone who would sit back and let that sort of thing slide. After all, he may be his father by choice, but his actual dad was a man who could never be contained. One of the greatest pirates with the strongest will, and both of those traits were passed down to Ace. So he took off on his own, and Whitebeard was left to then clean up both of their messes. And yes, of course, I am now talking about Marineford, the war that destroyed his entire family and then led to his own death. But that's not all, because it was also the moment he realized that the new dawn was actually coming, just not the way that he thought it would play out. As we all know, after Ace got captured, Whitebeard decided to storm the fortress, chasing after his son, leading an all-out assault against some of the greatest warriors alive in One Piece. Now, they weren't all quite Roxas or Garling's level, but he himself was already old at this point, and his will was a lot weaker, his body was losing it, and his judgment was a bit clouded as he couldn't keep an eye on all of his children, a mistake that would in the end cost him his own life. But in the end, that was okay, because through the fog of war and his narrowed vision, the real star of the new dawn emerged. Falling from the heavens like an angel, a young man with a straw hat, an image that Whitebeard was at this point very used to in his life, hit the scene as well. His determination was greater than anyone's on the battlefield. He was supported by some of the greatest pirates and revolutionaries around, a really weird bunch but still impressive, and he kept making new allies with every single step he took. But this man didn't care at all. He just really wanted to save his brother. And again, I'm gonna lean out of the window and say it's pretty safe to say that Whitebeard immediately clocked to who Luffy actually was. Remember, Shanks had told Whitebeard he was betting on the future, and Ace loved talking about his brothers. So to me, there's no doubt in my mind that the moment this kid squared up with him, he knew that Luffy was gonna be the next Joy Boy wearing Rogers, his old rival's hat. And that's why instead of the safe bet, like having Marco or Jozu try and save Ace, he let Luffy do it. He enabled him and gave him all of the resources he needed because he was the right choice and he needed to prove himself and grow stronger. Remember, even though Whitebeard wanted him to, Ace himself never wanted to become Pirate King. Ace never wanted to conquer the ocean and be free, he just wanted to have a family, kind of like Whitebeard. This kid though, this Luffy guy, he had Roger's smile and his will as well. He was gonna bring the new dawn, taking down everyone that threatened the lives of Whitebeard's big family. But unfortunately for him, they had already gotten to them. Akainu convinced Squad that his father didn't love him and only cared about Ace, which wasn't true of course, but you can't blame him, and Whitebeard really couldn't either, as we saw. He had led his family into the belly of the beast and he had paid the price. And honestly, I probably feel the same way if my decisions led to doubt and a loss of trust. I mean, I kind of get how he felt that way. And he then continued to pay that price when Teach appeared as well. I mean, the traitorous son who caused all of this, he abused Whitebeard's trust and love with nothing but greed and power in mind. And it's really kind of funny. I'm kind of sure that in that moment, Whitebeard truly realized what he had created here. Another Roxy Zebek, a fierce, ruthless, and power-hungry warrior of the sea. And maybe I think that's why he couldn't kill him. He was his son, but he was also the spitting image of the man who helped Whitebeard get where he was today. And just like his captain, he did know who would defeat him. That kid in the straw hat over there, Monkey D. Luffy, he would crush his dreams just how Roger crushed those of his captain. And of course, that was something that Whitebeard could get behind in his last moments. All that was left really was to make sure that it happened. So with his last fleeting breath, he pushed the next generation forward. He reinforced Luffy's ideals and knocked Teach back a few steps because he knew something that nobody else at this point did, that the One Piece was real and Luffy would be the man to claim it. Also that this guy, instead of Ace, would bring the new dawn. And man, I mean, all this talking about Yonko crews is kind of getting me fired up. Characters like Luffy, Blackbeard, and Whitebeard, they're just all such incredible pirates with such insane power. It honestly kind of makes me think that without an entire army, you could probably never defeat them. Only that isn't completely true. Now, we just saw Whitebeard fall here, so how about everyone else? How exactly would you defeat each of the Yonko crews? Well, you can watch that video right below me to find out, where we talk about each Yonko weakness. Otherwise, as always, thanks so much for watching, and I hopefully will see you in the next one. Oh, and shout out to all my Patreons over here. This is where they are. Thank you so much.